And we're live. Welcome back to another Corona Geek here where we talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. I'm your host, Charles McKeever, and today we're going to continue our conversation about Composer Library. I think, what, now we've had 3 sessions maybe, at least?
2 or 3. You know, I've lost count, actually.
Yeah, I'm with you. But it's been a good conversation. We've been kind of breaking down what Composer Library is, how it's used for scene management, how you put your objects into scenes. Last time we talked about the memory management of those objects and what it looked like, what the memory signature looked like between scenes that had objects in them and didn't have objects in them, and what it also looked like between Lua memory management and Corona SDK memory management, and all kind of good stuff. So today we're going to talk about sharing data between Composer Library scenes, which is very important. I keep making the distinction between Composer Library specifically because there's Composer GUI, which is the drag and drop editor that's in beta, and then there's also Composer Library, which is the library for scene management in Corona SDK. So we just want to be clear about what we're talking about. Joining us today, we've got Ed Marina from roaminggamer.com.
Hola.
We also have Eric Kincaid, developer of Questlore. Hey, Eric, how's it going? He's trying to get his laptop working so they can have some microphone action, but I haven't heard a peep from him yet, so we'll see how that goes. And also joining us, Scott Alderman? How you say it, Scott? Tell me.
Adelman.
Adelman, okay. Scott's a developer of many children's apps and also a contestant in ShipJam as well. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. We've got some winners to announce. But so thanks for joining us, Scott. I appreciate it. Let's see here. Okay, let's get into it then. Let's say that last week, if you didn't get a chance to watch the show, I just talked about it a moment ago. We talked about scene optimization tips. So we talked about memory management, memory usage. If you didn't get a chance to go watch that, go to youtube.com/coronageek. That is probably the best place to go to watch all of the videos that we've recorded, all the way from number 1 all the way up here to 126. But you can definitely catch the last few. I've taken the time to break the videos up into segments, into little snippets. So we published about 9 of them last week. So if you don't have enough time to watch the whole hour show, you just want to catch little pieces, we try to break those up into clips that you could consume in maybe 10-15 minute increments. So you go check out the topics there, and if you want to go watch the full Hangout, you can as well. Next week, we're going to have Jason Schroeder on with us. We've been talking about him here and there, about his progress ring module for Corona and how great it is and all the things that are out there. And he's going to actually come in and demo that for us and show us how it works, talk about its development, where it's headed, all those types of things. But if you're looking for a progress ring that you can add to your apps using one line of code, he's got a great module out there, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. I think there was a bug in one of the releases of the daily build for Corona, but it's been fixed, and so the progress ring, if you're having an issue with the progress ring, you might want to go check out Jason's repo and see what he's got, his notes there. He says it's been fixed, so that's great, but he will be here with us next week, so look forward to that. If you have suggestions for show topics, definitely want to encourage you to go over to the forum and suggest topics for us. We'll put a link in the show notes, of course, as well. But in the forums, there's a whole thread devoted to show topics, and we have quite a list going on there. But we need more. We need your suggestions because some of these things kind of snap together, and we can kind of build on a topic over time. But some things, some suggestions may not be something we can get to right away. So we need as many suggestions as we can, so we can fill, the topics going forward for this year, and make sure that we're talking about the things that you want to talk about. Because we can come on here every week and talk about things that we think are important, but we want to talk about the things that are relevant to you. ShipJam. So I just saw Laura jump off there. Hi Laura. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you. Oh, hold on.
So Laura, yeah, we can hear you. So Laura and Eric were gracious enough to host ShipJam, which, if you guys didn't see, that was an end of the year jam for pushing out one more app before the end of the year. So before 2014 ended, you needed to kind of dust off that code and get that project shipped. And I think it encouraged a lot of people, Laura. A lot of people have said that they wouldn't have done it otherwise. So thank you guys for putting that together.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so glad that so many people came together, and not only you and the judges, but also the sponsors. We had a lot of really great sponsors, and then all these people came out of the woodwork, and I thought it was really, really incredible.
Yeah, it's interesting, those types of things that you think is, it only exists in your head, and then when you say it out loud, you realize that there's all this energy that's behind it that you didn't even know was there, right? It's that giving everybody permission to participate. So it's very cool.
I was pretty surprised by how many people came out and got a lot of work done, and I thought it was really great. And actually, I was wondering, can I take a moment on air to thank my sponsors?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Tell us who tell us about the winners, and tell us about the sponsors, and yeah, take
awesome. Well, the winners, the first prize was a gentleman named Noah from Chunky Studios. And his app was a fantasy football game, which was everybody just totally loved it. Our second place winner, I believe, is also here today, Scott Edelman, for Pet Puzzles. And then the third place winner was I'm not sure if it's a gentleman or a studio. It's Raptor UVG. And the app that they came up with for third place was Mission Tiara. And then we had a last-minute judge's choice, and that went to long vowel word sounds. And I believe that was, let me just get the studio for who that was. Sorry. And that was by Thomas Wilson from Out of Touch Productions. And so those were the people who won. And if you go to shipjam.com and click on contestants, you can see everybody who won, and and then also everybody who just shipped an app. I've linked everything up there so that you can download them and check them out. And then I also put a listing for all of the apps that didn't ship. Mainly because I didn't actually get a chance to ship my own app. So I just wanted to put something in there for those that tried but didn't quite make it.
What was that? You didn't ship your own app?
I didn't ship my own app. I was too busy with ShipJam.
Oh, you are so busted.
I know.
So what this is it's a very intricate plot to not ship her own stuff. She and Eric decided. Yeah, she and Eric decided, okay, how can we not ship our own stuff? We will start something that will consume all of our time.
Well, again, everybody else ship their own things. As long as I don't ship my thing, that will be great. But I did have a lot of fun putting it together and emailing everybody, and I was really pleased. A lot of sponsors came together, and we had some amazing prizes, which I was sad that I didn't ship, so we didn't win. But definitely, we got some amazing Corona memberships from David Rengel over at Corona Labs, which I was really appreciative of. And then we had just a lot of other really fun entries. We got a free press release from PR Mac, which I use personally. I find that very helpful. We got some books from Dr. Brian Burton, who I believe is a guest frequently on your show. The mobile app development with Corona books, some memberships to masteringcoronasdk.com, which is a tutorial site with all these different tutorials, so I encourage everybody to check that out. We also got a license for Quick, which is a plugin that you use with Photoshop and Corona, and it's basically a WYSIWYG editor, and I always steer lots of people to it who are a little unsure about getting started, and I've actually seen some people have really, really good success. So we got a Quick license. And then Text Candy, Particle Candy, and Widget Candy, another three of my favorites. We got licenses for those, and then we got some licenses for Lua Glider, which is an IDE. Oh, I'm sorry, and then Text Candy, and Particle Candy, and Widget Candy, those all do different things. They enhance your apps, all kinds of great stuff. And then Lua Glider is a really excellent IDE development environment for Lua. And then the last sponsor was also myself. I kicked off 2 gift cards. So thank you for letting me iterate through that list, but thank you so much for all of the sponsors, for everything, and then thank you also to you, Charles, and Rob, and Graham Ranson over at Glitch Games for doing all the judging, and then of course Eric, my buddy over there, for helping us put it all together.
Very cool. Yeah, it was a lot of fun judging, just because I got to see a different creativity, different thoughts, just different ways of putting things together, things that I wouldn't have thought of before, so from a personal perspective, I was like, this is great, I love it, and I love that you put all the apps for the people who maybe either didn't ship or didn't win first, second, or third prize, because they were still a lot of great apps submitted, and it's great to see how many people participated. Like you said, I mean, this was kind of a last minute thing. Hey, what if we do this? And then just to see how many people turned out to do it, it's great. I love it.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the last thank you was to everybody who came out and participated. And, like you said, it really was just, a thing that Eric and I were talking about. And then it was like, oh, let's put this out into the world. And everybody kind of glommed onto it. So we were really happy that so many people, kind of rose up and came out and had a good time together.
So I wish that the next phase in my mind is it would be great if you could do like a monthly jam. Ship an app every month and then turn it into this thing. I know that would be overwhelming.
Actually, there's one like that. It's called one game a month.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Well, there you go. But I like the name Ship Jam, though.
Oh, that's true. That's true. But if you do want to, if you don't want to check that out, I tried it once and I failed after like January. But it's like #1GAM, the number 1GAM. It's one game a month, and okay. I believe they're still going. So if you want to check that out and be a lot more productive, but that was too intensive for me.
Yeah, and imagine coordinating and judging for one game a month. I mean, that's amazing. I don't know how they do it.
Oh my gosh.
Just doing this, I'm sure it was a lot of time.
Yeah, like I said, I didn't get to, I spent a lot of time on it, and then obviously there were holidays, and my own app kind of fell by the wayside. But I had fun because I just enjoy doing these things and putting it together. And I know Eric had fun looking at all the, helping me do all the stuff and putting it all together and, talking about everything and seeing all the apps. It was just a really awesome experience, and I'm glad that everybody came together to make it happen.
Well, excellent. Well, congratulations, Scott. You're on the call here with us, so it was a joy to run through the apps and kind of, like I said, see how everybody put things together. And you had an app that I think is very well polished. It was one of those things. It was very hard to judge each one of the apps because they were all so well done. But then you had to kind of come down to, well, how finished is it, and how well does it work, and how intuitive is it, and what are the graphics like, and do the sounds match up, and all that kind of stuff like that. So congratulations to you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for sure. I'm hoping can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it was great. Very encouraging. I had little motivation to get that app done. So it was really nice when Laura threw out this idea, and then I finally, after she bugged me a bunch to do it, I took like 3 days. Ran through that app. I already had the artwork ready to go. Just needed to actually, put all the stuff in the sprite or whatever, turn it into sprite sheets and get the animations going, design the puzzles, that sort of stuff. So it was good motivation. Yeah, again, I got pumped through it in about 3 days from just having the artwork, and then I've kind of reproduced those puzzles kind of time and time again. So I do already have like a chunk of the code set up. So it just is designing the animations, designing the puzzles, and getting that kind of overall finished product ready to go. So
excellent. Well, I tell you, it's amazing to see what can be done when you're motivated. One of the Noah, who was the first prize winner there, he emailed me this morning, as a matter of fact, and he said that he had put out a new game called Deflategate, which I don't know if you guys have been following sports or football or anything like that, but apparently there's some scandal that's going on about footballs being underinflated. According to Wikipedia, it says that Deflategate is a scandal in the National Football League stemming from an allegation that the New England Patriots deliberately or negligently underinflated footballs used in the AFC Championship game against the Indianapolis Colts on January 18th, 2015. Now, you know how these things trend, they get popular, and it's all over the news and all that kind of stuff like that. Well, Noah decided that he would put an app together. So he collaborated with someone else, and in about 3 days they put together an app, and it's now out in the App Store. So so his app, I think, was the winning app, was a football-related game, and then now he's kind of capitalizing on this trending topic in football and he's got another football game out. So I think it's amazing that once you kind of see an opportunity, you're like, hey, you jump on it and put an app out. You can do it, as little as 3 days if you have the inclination to do it. So it's great stuff. But we'll have a link to that in the show notes so that you can go check it out. So, but yeah, Laura, Eric, thank you guys for putting it together, and we really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing next year's Game Jam or Chip Jam.
Thanks again for participating and the great chip and the great mention on Corona Geek. It really brought a lot of people in. Sweet.
Well, speaking of bringing a lot of people in, Mike Hempflig is running a sale over his site on Crave Creative. He's done a bunch of widget themes. And he's running a sale over there. They're now $14.98. They're regularly $19.98. It's a weird price, $19.98. I guess less than $20 sort of thing. But now they're less than $15. So he's got several things over there to choose from. He's done all the image work. He's got bunch of different styles, flat design, rounded designs, all the kind of stuff like that. And you get the images and the source files along with that. So go check it out, cravecreative.com. We'll put a link in the show notes. But thanks, Mike, for letting us know about that. Also, we are playing Chip Chain. Have you guys been playing Chip Chain? I think that Greg Pugh is still maybe our reigning champion on Chip Chain. So you need to give him some challenge. This is our last week to play it. You just go to chip-chain.com. We'll put a link in the show notes. But all you have to do is play the 2-minute challenge, rack up as many points as you can, and then share a screenshot over on the Corona Geek Facebook page. So just go to facebook.com/Corona Geek, share your screenshot there, and if you have the highest score, you win a $50 gift card. And we're going to announce that next Monday, February 2nd. So what do you have to lose? Go ahead and just play it and share it. And even if you need to just take a picture, take a picture of your Android device. If it's too hard to get the screenshot for you, just take a picture of it and share it on the wall. And if you're the high score winner, then congratulations. So we'll put a link in the show notes for that, but it does end next Monday, so time's running out. All right, what else do we have here?
We have to have a rule from now on. If he wins this one, we might have to just
I know. That's what I told him. I said we're gonna put a limit on you, and that's that's generally why contests have limits, because someone will win over and over again. But it's like the lottery, like they say on the commercials. You can't win if you don't play. So he just happens to be playing. Okay, so we have some odd bits here, but I'm going to leave those till next time because I want to get to the composer library optimizations. Like we said last time, we were talking about memory. This time we're talking about sharing data between scenes. And I think our conversation last time, Ed, had left off with I had said that somebody wanted to have what did they say, persistent data between scenes, and you had said there's a difference between sharing data between scenes and persisting data between scenes. So
yeah, it's the word persist which is the difference. You're right. We left off last time looking at example 6 or underbar memory, which was a discussion of different memory topics as related to Composer. And specifically, we finished off on example 5, which was something I can't remember at this point. But we were moving on to sharing data between scenes. And this all started with somebody asking us, how do I persist data? And so at that point, I was not sure if they meant share data between scenes or actually persist. And persisting data means that I have saved the data. It's stored somewhere. I like to call it on the disk because I'm still a PC guy. But persistent memory, basically the persistent storage on your device, be it the documents directory or perhaps the temporary directory. Although if you want to keep things persistently, the documents directory is the place to put it. And then later when the person starts up the app, they can reload that data even if they've quit the app or the app has crashed or whatever. And so that's what the persisting is. Persisting is that you can retrieve it at any time in the future versus sort of like this transient, it's stored in memory thing. So anyways, we can move on here. I want to show you a couple of examples. First, we will do memory sharing between scenes. That is, I will share data between scenes. So if you're following along, you can go into 6-memory, or underbar, I'm sorry, keep saying dash, and load up the example. And when you load it, it will look like this. Make sure I'm showing my screen. I am. So you're going to see this list, and on the left side are white dots. Next to the white dots are little titles that tell you what the example is. And on the right side are buttons. So and everything is horizontally aligned. So scene 1, the white dot. What the white dots do is if I load a scene, that will turn green, which means that it's been created. And if I exit the scene, so in this case I'll click button 2, and that goes to scene 2, which then gets created, and the red dot here indicates that scene 1 has been destroyed. So going into, let's take a rewind here. In the initial instance when we talked about this, I created a template for creating standard composer setups. That is a splash screen, a main menu, some other stuff. And in this template, I provided some settings. So if we look at main.lua in this particular project, we'll see that I've set up is debug equals true. So we're going to get debug messages from composer. I've also set up, and this is the important flag for this example, recycle on scene change is set to true. And so what I'm doing here is I'm telling composer, every time I change scenes, destroy the scene I'm leaving. And the reason I did that was because for memory purposes, I wanted to exacerbate the creation and destruction steps. So in other words, to clear memory as soon as possible so you could see something happening. All right, so scene 6 is where we're going to start. And Composer itself provides a method of sharing data between scenes. And what that is, let me find it here. Let me go ahead and reload the project. Run scene 6. When I run scene 6, what you're going to see is at the top is a little message that says last scene -1, count 0. So that's after I first load the app. What that's doing is if we look at the scene in the create, I will create a couple of labels. One is called last scene label, and another one that is called last count. So this one here, last scene label. This one is last count label. And then in the did enter scene method, that is, we've created the scene and we just finished entering the scene, I will ask composer to get a variable called last scene, and if it doesn't find it, I will set the value to -1. So that's what we're doing right here. And then I will get the count. So I'll say get a count, and I'll say composer get variable, and I'm looking for a variable named count. Again, if I don't find it, I set it to 0. So as you can see in the example when we run it, this bit of code here is run. I then immediately store the scene number, and I'll show you where that's defined. And I store the count, but before I store the count, I increment it. So if we do this, just examine the count. I get the count, it'll initially be 0. I add 1 to it, and then I tell the composer, store this variable, set this variable, count, to whatever I pass here, which is count +1. So scene number, just for those following, is defined at the very top of the file. Every one of these files has a local variable called scene num. And we talked about this last week, but I use it basically to show you what scene you're in. So every file uses this value. Let me find it. In the create method, and it basically creates a little label in the upper right corner, so we know what scene we're in. It's just a nice way for people following along to know that this is in fact changing to scene 2 or scene 6. But I figured, since I already had it defined, that I might as well incorporate it as part of this example. So, sorry, let's just do it again real fast. The first time this runs, I get the variable last scene. If it's not found, I set it to -1. Then a little bit further down, I simply force it to be whatever that local variable is, which in this case is 6. Now I know that some people listening will say, well, there's another way to get the last scene. There's a composer function which will tell you what the current scene you are in is, or the last scene. But it's a little bit different. What that tells you is the actual file name of the scene that you previously loaded or you are currently in. So that's not what I'm trying to cover here. So without going on and on here, the critical part of this is the composer basically says or provides you these functions, get variable and set variable. And you can get and set any named variable that you want. And if we demonstrate this properly, I will load 6. The last scene is -1, as demonstrated here. And then I will load scene 7. Scene 7 is exactly the same as scene 6, does the same stuff. Gets the variable. If it can't find it, it sets -1. Gets the count. If it can't find it, it sets it to 0. However, in scene 6, I set these variables. So now when I click on scene 7, what we should see is last scene 6, count 1, which is what we get. And then I can just go back and forth. And every time I go back and forth, it increments count. And in that scene, it sets the scene number to whatever it was as defined at the top of the file.
So just to make sure I'm clear, what we're seeing there then is that that those values are shared between the two scenes because you set them in one scene and then you get them in the other.
Basically what I'm doing, or what's happening here, yes, is Composer is set up to let us create variables somewhere that it manages and then retrieve them at a later time. So we don't have to have variables set in our files. We could simply do what I did down here, which is set this variable, and then some other time when I need it, I could make a variable like compose, if I can type. This is what happens when you offset your fingers on the keyboard. A more practical example would be, let's say I had a level, and right before it exited, I wanted to save the score. And let's say I was saving the score in some variable somewhere else in my file. So I could save last score, and let's pretend that I have a variable called last score defined somewhere else in this file. It'll take the value out of that variable and store it. And now any other Composer scene after this can simply do type.
Which is great because I mean, if you've already pulled, like, let's say that you were running an application that pulls data out of a database or something, and you were using it in one scene, and then you wanted to go to another scene, like maybe add a form or something like that, and you wanted to pre-pop the form with information, but you didn't want to go back to the database again to get the information because you'd already grabbed it, then you could just pass it across to the second scene and pre-pop the form.
Yeah, this is a very uncomplicated, simple method of sharing data between scenes. Now I want to show you another example, which is 8 and 9. This becomes unwieldy once you have lots and lots of data to share, and there's better ways to do it. So I would suggest this to people who have like 3 or 4 variables that they want to share, like maybe like a lives counter and a score counter, and they need it all over the place. Then that's great. This is the easy way to do it. It's straightforward, and you can be guaranteed that it will work. However, like I said, if you had lots and lots of data, a better way to do it, and this has been covered in the blogs and in the forums variously, what you want to do is create a module. And so what I've done here is I've created a file, which within the file, it creates a table called My Data. It's an empty table. And then on that table, I add 2 fields, one called Last Scene and another one called Count, which is basically the same thing we were doing previously. And then, at the very end of the file, I return a reference to this table, My Data. So the way we use this is if you look at scene8.lua in this example, you'll see at the very top that I have required scripts.mydata, which is where that file lives in this example. And I assign what it returns to a variable which I just call my data. I could call it anything, but I've chosen in this case to call it my data. Similarly, if we look at scene 9, it's going to have the same thing at the top. So scene 8 and scene 9 for this example both have a reference to my data. I'm going to reload the project. And let's go down here and look at the will enter. Let's see. Did enter, I'm sorry. So in the create, again, I set up the labels. And in the did enter, this time what I do is I just directly access my data, which was required at the top of the file, and I append that to last seen. So in other words, the label text that I was creating. And then further down, what I do, and I'll expand this, you can compare the two side by side. Simply, I assign scene number to mydata.lastSeen, and here I increment the count by saying mydata.count equals mydata.count plus 1. So the critical thing for people to understand here is that by putting this into a module and then requiring it at the top of the file, this file has access to that table even though it lives somewhere else. And scene 9 also has access to that table even though it lives somewhere else. So the module itself is loaded into memory. It stays there forever unless we purposely unload it. And then any scene, any file can require this table, or that is, require the file and get a reference to the table, and then everybody can access it. This is a much more powerful way, in general, within Lua to share data across files, and so that's why they suggested in the blogs. So I'll run this example, but it's not very exciting. It basically does the same thing. Scene 8, the initial values were -1 and 0. That's what we're seeing. I go to scene 9. Scene 8, set this to 8, so this is now 8. Last scene is 8, and the count is 1. And we just go back and forth, and the counter increments every time, showing us that they are, in fact, both accessing the same table. And I said that I would expand this and compare them side by side. So originally, we used set variable and get variable to do this. Let's do this side by side. That would be nice. So with the get and set, this is what we have. Get, modify, and set. Or we could just access the variables directly from our reference to the table, which is what I prefer to do.
Yeah, which is a much more universal way of being able to work with data as opposed to being. I mean, it's not really composer specific. It's just a universal way of being able to do that.
Yeah, actually, I found myself when making these examples. People asked a question. They said, "Well, within the context of Composer," and I said, "Yeah, there's a way to do that in Composer, but oftentimes there's another way to do it that might be better." And in this case, I would suggest people use modules because it is, in fact, better, again, for large amounts of data or data that has to be shared between Composer scenes and other parts of your game or app. It's a more universal way of approaching it. So now, let's get to the question that was asked, and I'm going to pretend now that they really meant persistent data.
Now, is there, before you go on, I wanted to ask, is there a third way to do it?
Oh, there's always a third way.
I'm thinking specifically about the options table and passing params in there.
Okay, so what you're talking about, are you talking about config.lua?
No, I'm talking about...
Yeah, you're right. There's another way to pass data between scenes, which is the... yes, that's right. Let me show it to you.
Yeah, on go to scene, there's passing the options table with the params.
Yes, that is. I didn't want to cover that because it's a bit more advanced. But I'll do it. Okay, so people are going to have to follow along here because I'm not going to write all the code. But basically, what this piece of code right here in main.lua, which I'm highlighting, does is it calls composer go to scene, and I'm not doing it. Maybe I don't have a good example of this. Let me find one.
Well, you know what? I mean, I can just put a link in the show notes, and they can go to the documentation because they're in the composer go to scene examples.
In a nutshell, what it is you create a table, and you pass it as one of the arguments to go to scene or show overlay. And what happens is Composer will pass that table as part of the initialization data to the next scene. And the next scene can get that table and extract the data from it. The difference is, though, that this is like sort of a way of sending data back and forth between two specific scenes. It's not quite as universal as using a module, or I mean, I use it. It definitely has its purposes. But I find it almost simpler to just say create a module exterior to this and then load it like I did here in scene 8 and 7 and 8.
Yeah, and that's the reason I brought it up, because I was wondering if you had an opinion on what would be the difference between doing the params and doing, say, like when you were doing the set and the get. That you just said that one's specific between passing data between specific scenes, whereas the other one's a little more flexible. The get and set's a little more flexible, and then the my data is even more flexible than that.
Yeah, the my data is the most generic approach. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could require Composer in any file. You don't have to do anything with it except use the get and set variables, but it would be kind of weird, and it wouldn't be very portable later, because you've included Composer purely for the purpose of sharing variable data. That doesn't seem very useful to me. So that's why I showed the my data module. But let me show you about persistence.
Yeah.
So before I show you persistence, within this this particular example, 6 memory, if you look in the scripts folder, you will see another folder called extensions. These are extensions that I extracted from the Super Starter Kit, SSK, and what they do is they add a bunch of extra functionality to the IO library, the string library, and the table library that come sort of like standard with Lua. Among the things that I provided, let's just bring it up here. The string library, I added some things like splitting, which is to take a string with tokens separating values and then split that into a table. And some other things that are in here that were useful. Let me find it. And there's quite a few things in here, but this is primarily included because it gets used by the table code. Oh yeah, left pad and right pad. So basically easily padding strings with spaces or whatever, some character that you want to put on the left or right side. And again, this is only included because the table extensions use some padding to print stuff out. The big thing that allows me to do this persistence example is that the table extensions have included, let me find it, yes, a new function called save and a new function called load. And both of these will allow you to, the save will allow you to save a table to a file, and load will allow you to load that table subsequently from a file, returning a new table containing what the previous table contained. So this is the part where I'm actually persisting. I'm writing the data or loading the data from persistent storage. So with that in mind, the last example here shows how persistent data works. So what you want to do, I'm sorry here, let me find it.
So up to this point, we've been talking about sort of almost in-memory data sharing, and you're talking about now going to talk about persistent data, which is actually storing it to disk and retrieving.
I'm making it persistent. So just to drive this home, I've reloaded the app over here. If I press 6, and then you can see the last scene is -1 and count is 0. Then I go to 7, I go to 6. It's doing the thing we expect. It's setting the variable and it's incrementing the count. However, as soon as I reload this app, so this is on my device, if I quit it or it crashed and I restart it, or in the simulator I simply reload it, the values get set back to their defaults. So nothing was stored. I didn't save the person's last score or their high score or how many lives they had or how many coins they had, or whatever it is you're trying to store. It's totally useless for anything in the future should they quit the app, should it crash, whatever. What we really want is to be able to store that stuff forever and ever. And to do that, I have provided you a very simple example which you can use, which is called My Persistent Data. The file can be found in the scripts directory. It depends upon the extensions, so you must load those also. And if you look in main.lua, I believe that's where I loaded those. At the very top of main.lua, I have 3 lines here which require the extensions files, IO, string, and table. Now those are loaded up forever and ever and can be used by my very simple module. And for the purpose of this example, the scene that demonstrates it is scene 10. And that's located in 6 memory, interface, IFC, scene 10. Let me walk you through what this does before I show you. So my persistent data at the top, it says here, local the data, and what it does is I use the loading function, which has been added as an extension to table, and I say load this file, mypersistentdata.json, and I don't pass any other arguments. And so what this does is by default it looks in the documents directory, which is a special directory that Lua has available to it, or not Lua, but Corona, for storing files, for reading and writing files forever and ever to be stored as long as your app is on the device. If you delete your app, then everything in the documents directory gets deleted also. But the documents directory can otherwise be considered to be permanent storage for your app. If it does not find this, it will return nil. Table.load doesn't find anything, it returns nil. So what I want to do instead is if it doesn't find anything, I just provide it with a blank table. So, oh, that was brilliant. Click happy there. In the next line, this will look a little confusing. I say local my persistent data equals blank table. Now, this table is what I will attach all my functionality to. And this table is where I will store all the data. So for people who do modules, this looks like I'm doing a module within a module. But really what I've got here is some local variables at the top, with just one in this case. And then the actual module body where it does all the work. So in a nutshell, what I do here is the next one is mypersistentdata.store, which is a function. If you call it, it will basically save whatever is in the data back into this file, mypersistentdata.json. If I call get and pass it a variable name, it will look in this table, try to find a variable by that name or a field with that name. If it doesn't find it, it will return nil, nothing. Over here I have another function called set, where I pass it a name, a value, and a flag called autostore. The name is basically the same as get, so it says within the data, look for a field with this name and set this value. Then, if I have passed true for autostore, it will also call the store function. So what this is saying is, if I do this, let's say I stored my module in a variable called xxx, and I said set bob 10 true. What it would do is it would look for a field named Bob and set it to 10, regardless if it existed or not, and then immediately save that to the file mypersistentdata.json. So we will undo this. Finally, I added a little piece here. A lot of people, they implement something like this on their own, and they get this far and they think, okay, that's what I needed, it's all done, it's working. They release their app, and then they say, oh, I need to release a new version of my app, but it sure would be nice if I had a way to set some new default variables so the next version of my game has this variable already set. And so what this section does here, it's a little bit wonky, a little bit strange, I think, for some people.
Yeah.
Yep. Hello?
Yeah, there was a box, a bag of it, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so I've created yet another table called defaults. And within defaults, I just set some variable names and give them values. So if I wanted to create another variable here called, let's say, Bob again, and set it to 10, the next time I run this, what it will do is it will execute this piece of code. If you recall, it will have already loaded up the data as the very first line. It will then iterate over it and say, it will look for these variable names here, and if they don't exist, it will put the default value in. So in other words, first time it runs, loads it up, and then looks through the defaults list. If it doesn't find these variables, it sets them to the initial values specified here, and then after that, they're stored away.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because you're...
Kind of a long example.
No, that makes sense because when you
walk through it, but it's a little bit hard to grok, I think, initially.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me demo it. That'll make more sense, and then I'll show you setting an example afterwards.
But generally, what you're doing is you're showing us an example of setting and loading the data, and then you're also showing us an example of setting some defaults if we don't have data. But the idea being that it's all stored to the documents directory and persisted across different sessions or different, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, different sessions. You're right.
I kind of think of that as like a load and save, a game load, game save. Whenever I have it, whenever I do like a, I check for a system event, like they turn off the app or something, I save the state of the game and the player.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what it can be used for.
Right, right. That's pretty interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, I tried to, I've done this, like I said, this is one of those sort of common things that people do. And I myself, over time, have discovered that it's very nice to add this additional little piece down here. Because it never fails. I write an app, it's got 3 settings that I needed on the first release. Then I added a new feature in the later release, and I'm like, God, I need a way to get a default value for that setting in. But people already have the app installed. So how do I force it to add a new default? I mean, there's many approaches, but this is a very straightforward way that in subsequent runs, you can always ensure that you have these default settings put into the data. So I just want to show you here. When you run the simulator, I'm running Windows Simulator, but it's similar on OS X. You can go in here and you can say, Show Project Sandbox, which for me will open up a folder, has the name of the app and a bunch of numbers, which is just a thing it does to give it a unique folder name. And in here you're going to see a documents directory and a temp, which is the temporary directory. So let's go into documents. You can see there's nothing in here. So when I run this, hopefully if I've done everything correct, if I click Scene 10, it's going to run this example, Scene 10, right here, and it's going to require this file for the very first time. Up until this point, this has never been required. As soon as I do that, we should see a file here appear. So I'm going to do this now. Boom. So it loads the project up, which then runs this line right here, which then requires this file. All this code executes. It looks for this, doesn't find it. That's fine. Sets it to a blank value. Sets up the module. This is the functionality. Runs through the default code. Examines the data. At this point it's all blank, so it's going to set the data count to this default 0. And then it runs store. Finally, it returns this table, which contains my module functionality, store, get, and set, as a table reference, which I can then use later in my code to get variables and to set variables. So, as you can see, let's take a look at this file itself. Let's just see what this looks like right now. Right now, we have a simple JSON encoded file that has a variable in it called count, and the value is 1. The reason the value is 1, not 0, is because as soon as the scene ran, it called my persistent data get, it found it, it printed out that value right here is count 0, so we're seeing the initial value. It then took value and added 1 to it, and we called my persistent data.set, and we said set the variable count to value, and when you do it, save it immediately. And at that point, it updated the file and it stored the value 1. So if we could have seen this sort of like paused time, what we would have seen was 0 and then right away 1. Now I can click scene 10 over and over, and what it's going to do is just keep incrementing that count. Or I could reload the app someday, click scene 10, and what we should see up here is 16 because it's been persisted. And right now, if we look at the file, that's what it's got, count 16. Sure enough, the data is permanently stored, easily retrieved, not lost. So now let's do one more thing. Let me take a look at the code and see if I set myself up. Yeah. So I set myself up here, and you can see the last thing it does in this did enter is it's looking for a variable called something. Great name for a variable. But it doesn't exist. So let's say this is like release 2.0 of my demo, and now it needs a variable called something to do something with. Okay, that's sounding stupid now that I say it out loud. Whatever the case may be, all you got to do, you're modifying your code, you go into this file, you add a new line under the defaults, something, you add a new, if you can type, new variable, it says default something, and let's say, let's give it a value of Corona Geek. Now, I'm going to reload my app, and if this is all working correctly, it'll discover it doesn't exist, it'll set it as a default value, it'll save it away, and I should get, if I did this right, no, Corona Geek, bada bum bum, there it is.
Can you go back and show us that that file? Are you showing us?
Go back and show you the file.
Yeah.
Now you'll see that it's got count 18 and something is set to Corona Geek.
Which the important piece being, in case somebody didn't catch that, is that you didn't change the original data that was there. You just added.
Right.
You were able to just add additional data.
This is a way to retain everything that the user has. They've got their stored score, and I got 15 gems. But your new game also uses coins. So you're like, well, I'd like to give them 10 coins to start off if they've never played before. So you just make a new variable. Let's call it coins. And because I'm generous, I'm going to give them 100 free coins. And the first time they run, they install the new version of the app and they run it. Boom, coins is set to 100. They got 100 coins.
Nice.
That's pretty neat, but then I couldn't make my dirty patches.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through lots and lots of iterations on this, and
yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I think you're making a joke, and it's
yeah, totally.
Do patches. I mean, because you don't. How do you approach? I've got a user with stored data. I don't want to mess them up, but I want the new version of the app to have all this functionality.
Oh, it's brutal, especially if like the game's already released and you've got like 5,000 to 10,000 active playing clients, because then you can't screw up their data, because then you've just like stopped a bunch of people that are playing from actually continuing. But sometimes you actually have to like, you know, rife through an entire JSON to find out what the circumstances are and physically change that data, and that's just horrific. This is actually a really cool way of doing it.
Actually, I'm glad you brought this up. We got a couple minutes here. Two things. One, Eric, you asked a question last week. I made an example for it. It looks like we're not going to get to it today. We will cover it, but the code is already available as 8. and I will run it briefly. 2, I'm glad you brought that up, because let's say you are doing a release of a new version of your app. One way to handle this is, let's say version 2 of your app has got very different functionality for some feature. How do you tell the app, if you're version 1, do the old thing. If you're version 2, then look for this data, convert it, and do the new thing. So in other words, you're taking a user who's running version 1, you'd like to keep their data, but version 2 stores it a different way and does something new with it. How do you get that user's old data into the new version? And the way to do it is to use a feature like this. And in your first version, if you're thinking forward, you simply have a variable called, let's say, like app version, and call it 1. And then, this isn't exactly right, but the point is you can put a variable in your code that checks that is the current app version, and then upon discovering that it's got a new version compared to the stored value, it will run a piece of code to do a conversion of the old data, and then set the new value for app version, which basically says forever and ever after this, I don't need to modify this anymore. This is version 2. I've already done the conversion. So the current version matches what's stored in my defaults or in my data, and I'm done. I don't know if this made sense.
It'd be interesting to run a beacon type situation where you check the app version of all your existing players and just figure out every time they load the app, who's on version what, and get a kind of a breakdown of your community, your population, and see where they are.
Yep. I don't think I did a good job of explaining that. All right, this is what happens when you on-the-fly things. That's okay. I wanted to run the example real fast here. Sorry.
I think that makes sense to me. I don't know if it made sense to anybody else. I think it makes sense.
All right. So last week, Eric asked me about sprites, but it was more generally applicable to objects and managing them. And I think the problem you were having was you were creating sprites and they're not being managed by the scenes. You weren't getting them into the scene object. And so I will not go through all the code here, but this example 8 shows you what happens if you do it incorrectly. Then it shows you 3 ways, which are, one is just an okay way to handle it, one is a good way to handle it, and one is what I consider the best way. In the wrong case, when I click, let me reload the app. When I click on wrong, what's going to happen is it's going to load up that scene, and the scene will create a running horse sprite, which comes out of the Corona examples. There's an example out there that where one of the Corona examples where they have a horse animation. And because it's doing it wrong, the horse is going to appear right away, even before the scene gets transitioned over. And what that's indicating is that the horse is created, it's not being managed, so it doesn't slide over, it doesn't do anything. And when I click on back, the horse is still there. It's no good. This is not what I wanted. What I really wanted to see was I click OK, and the horse will slide in from the right in the scene that it's supposed to be in. And then when I click back to go back to the menu loads up. Whereas good and best will also have exactly the same behavior, but the distinction of good and best, right, was that good is a module that allows you to pass in the scene that you want to put the object in, and best is a module that does the same thing, but it also provides you one more thing. It provides you a way to completely unload the module, if you wish. And so we'll cover this next time. But for people who want to jump ahead, wrong creates it, does not insert it in a scene. OK creates it, inserts it in the scene, so now it's managed and everything is perfectly fine. Good shows you how to create a module for creating sprites and allow that module to place the object in the scene instead of you doing it manually. And best does the same thing as good and also provides a way of cleaning up all the memory. And this is for people who do, this is targeting people who do, for example, storybook apps or any other situation where they've got lots and lots and lots of sprites. So pages 1 through 5 use the same sprites, and then they're done. They're never going to use them again. Pages 6 through 10 use some more sprites. If you don't unload this stuff from memory, your memory footprint starts to get larger and larger and larger and larger. So the best example provides you, I show you how to remove everything from memory, including the sprites. So it doesn't actually remove them, but what it says to Lua and Corona is it says, if you want to remove these, you can do it. I'm not using them anymore. And that includes the module itself. Everything is kicked out of memory.
All right. Well, very good.
So
well, thank you for that. I think I saw Eric's icon appear twice, so I'm not sure if he heard the full answer to that. But yeah, exactly.
He's getting much
but
out of this one.
yeah, if he missed that, he can go back and watch the explanation on the replay. But yeah, if we get some time, maybe we could walk through the code at some point. But it's good stuff, man. As always, I like the conversation about not only just how to share information between scenes, but also how to do it in an efficient way. Because you want your application to be well behaved, even if you have plenty of memory and can get away with maybe having a bloated footprint. You still want it to be a good citizen with all the other apps that are out there. So,
well, if you're not a good citizen and you're on iOS, it's going to kick you off anyways.
Right. I mean, and then that's what that leads to bad user experience, bad reviews, all that kind of stuff like that.
Right, you don't want that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm reading the group chat here. At that moment when Eric appeared, it says, I guess he got kicked off. He didn't get to see that whole business right there.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I was saying you'll have to go back and watch the replay. So yeah. It's all there. It's all captured. Yeah. It's archived for your application. Yeah, forever. All right, well that's good. I think we'll leave it there. Just a reminder: next week we're going to talk with Jason Schroeder about his progress ring module. So we will. Do we have any more Composer stuff? You want to?
It's a never-ending topic.
It is a never-ending topic.
We have 2 more Composer things to talk about.
Okay. Well,
the code look at the thing that I just showed. It's very quick. So we'll be able to cover that briefly next week. It's straightforward. Okay. And then I also wanted to show one of the things that I find to be the coolest. As I've developed games and apps using Composer, and before that Storyboard, I always found myself in a situation where I was like, I like this transition effect, but it doesn't quite do what I need it to do. And I didn't know initially, and I should have known, that all of this stuff is exposed. You just got to dig a little deeper. You can modify all of these transitions, or you can create your own new transitions. So I created a example project taking stuff that other people did in the forums and in the blog posts, basically stuff I learned from them, and I just wanted people to know and to see that they can in fact create their own custom transitions and do some really cool things with the Composer Scene Manager.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. So what we'll do is next week we'll talk about the progress ring, and then if we have time, we'll talk about custom Composer transitions. And if we don't get to it all next week, then we'll look forward to that the Monday after. So there you go. Well, all right. Well, congratulations to everybody who won on Chip Jam and everybody who participated, because you're all winners. And that's it. We'll be back here next Monday to talk about mobile app development using Corona SDK. And until then, have a great week and happy coding.
Cheers.